The most important aspect of a video game is the core mechanic. So much so, you'd be hard-pressed to find a good developer that makes art before finalizing some sort of prototype. It's the reason Miyamoto left Mario to hop around in empty rooms for the first several months of development, why programmer art exists, and why most popular games succeed in spite of their graphics. And that's where I come in.
Literally the smartest programmer that has ever lived.
Now things are finally... Nope. Well...
Smartest programmer.
Oh, yeah! I mean, no one was suggesting.
I thought my core mechanic was morphing. This little interaction where the player toggles between two modes of movement, rolling and jumping. I added sector after sector and added these new morph modes like jets and gliders, and I just tried to see what cool interactions would come about from just these morph modes. What I didn't realize was that my game was pretty shit. It wasn't fun to play at all. So, I've spent the last 5 years or so trying to turn a simple mechanic into a fully fledged game. I have been ridiculously persistent and stubborn, trying to add as little to the base platformer as I could, and instead making and remaking art for my game, even if it meant it felt like absolute garbage to play. That is, until now. Now, I have done nothing but play platformers for the past few months, and after looking at games specifically like Hollow Knight, Donkey Kong Country, and Mission in Snowdrift Land, I think I've finally found my inspiration. I spent a lot of time just running with a rudimentary skeleton of a platformer game, and there were a lot of key elements missing. A lot of these elements I chalked up to polish, things that Mark Brown might call game feel or game juice. I actually spent a lot of time adding these things like screen shake, responsive controls, particles, but none of these alone could save my sinking game. Something still just felt horribly wrong about how the player controlled and the general feel of the game. Something fundamental was missing. And so after making some adjustments over the past couple of months, I have finally compiled a list of attributes I think are fundamental to the platforming genre. The faster a player can control their character, the faster they can respond to obstacles and enemies. Tight controls makes high-paced action fun, not frustrating. This is the reason we all hate those ice levels, where the player is constantly slipping and sliding about, slow to respond to input. And while platformers don't always give players full control over their character, in fact it's the restriction of control which generally brings challenge, like trying to direct Super Meat Boy's momentum, or the Hollow Knight's absolute snail's pace, or even the minor differences between Donkey and Diddy Kong's movements. It's the synthesis of full platformer control that should include responsive horizontal movement, and then the control of jump height. Think of how Super Smash Bros. Is a fighting game, but at heart, it is a fighting game laid over a platformer. The player's platforming abilities are what allows them to end up in optimal positions to fight, without which new players are left floundering about. Just being able to low hop distinguishes such a huge gap between levels of play. If the movement in Smash were any less precise, the fighting aspect would suffer because of it. I had begun to uncover some of these problems in previous devlogs, but I'll recap everything I've learned so far. In making the morph mechanic as efficient as possible by delegating morphing to the full act of tapping, I had inadvertently opened a new opportunity. On the down press, the player enters a new morph mode, and on the up press, they exit. This is the equivalent of a button press in a traditional platformer, and a crucial control. The time it takes to tap multiple times in a row is just too costly, and players lack the ability to then properly react to the environment. With this extra utility of the tapping input, the player can now control the height of their jump with a lot of responsiveness. The longer a player holds down, the higher they jump. These changes were pretty big, and make for a very tight platformer already. However, I had more work to do. What culminated in the final decision was a big decision for me. I'll be honest, it really was just because I didn't want to implement this feature. Maybe because I was taking too much inspiration from Super Meat Boy, but I ended up adding health to my player. This alone has completely changed the feel of Morpher, and is probably the best decision that I've made this far. And I was able to bang this out over the course of just 2 days, and so I had a working health system in no time. I started by creating some invincibility frames after being hit, which I had some issues getting a hold of the correct sprites because I toggle between 2 different ones when you morph. But after this, I was able to start adding a tiny bit of knockback. Now, I hate in games when getting hit causes you more issue, as if being hit and losing health isn't enough. So to combat this, I firstly made the player get knocked back a minimal amount, and then I give them the ability to jump mid-air immediately afterwards. Now, it's a pretty small window to jump in, but it does give the player just enough extra control to come back from being hit, and certainly more control than just completely dying every time they make a minor mistake. Next, I created some blue hearts for the player to pick up, which restores their health, and made checkpoints also replenish health. In the future, I plan on adding some visual changes to the HUD to indicate health, but for now, these work, and with these changes, I feel much more confident in throwing challenges at the player. In fact, looking at the way I have been designing levels just in the past couple of months as opposed to now, I'm realizing I was holding back a lot when making my levels. I didn't feel confident in the player's ability to face challenges that arguably should have been very easy to overcome, just because each challenge required a consecutive, flawless execution. Should the player make any minor mistake throughout a level, they would be forced to retreat to the nearest checkpoint, a terribly immersion-breaking event that just didn't aid in making my game fun. Now, I actually get excited when making a level, because it actually looks fun to play, and it's challenging, rather than just being frustratingly difficult. Being able to come back from being hit in a level is just something that doesn't happen when you have no health. And while it may have worked for Super Meat Boy, that aspect just doesn't fit my game. Oh wait. This thing comes off, So I know I'm not covering a lot in this devlog, but I have been making some pretty big changes, so stay tuned. I feel pretty happy with the base game at this point, and since I skipped the prototype phase, I think this was a pretty important step for me to include. I know I shouldn't spend too much time trying to perfect my game, but I think this was a very important step for me, and I'm really happy that I did it. And now I feel very confident moving on, and my game actually feels fun to play. And I know I've done a pretty bad job of balancing this and school and just other things going on, so I'm going to try and hold myself to posting once a month, and we'll go from there. Thanks for all the continued support, and I'll see you next time.